about finding their volume, finding their surface area. And so before getting into that, we really want you to think deeply about how 3D figures are actually created and be able to visualize how you make a 3D figure. So there are going to be three things that we talk about in terms of how you make a 3D object. In this whisk, you're going to hear about how you name 3D objects. We're going to go into some vocab and secret hot question. So first up, the first way to make a 3D object, 3D figure, is that you can fold 2D shapes. So let's say you have a cube. One way that you can make that cube is by starting with what's called a net. Starting with a 2D figure, a bunch of different squares, and you can then fold that together to make a 3D shape. And you can do that with cubes, you can do that with other 3D shapes as well. Or you can think about how they fold out to make a net, how they fold out into two-dimensional shapes. You can go from net to solid, and thinking about from solid to net. And so when you think about how 2D shapes can fold up to a 3D shape, it's going to help you thinking about surface area, thinking about how much paint it would take to cover a surface. Another way that you can make a three-dimensional shape is that you can translate a 2D shape through a z-axis. There's a lot of words there, so I'm just going to show a visual of this. So let's say you have a shape. You have a rectangle here, and the rectangle is on an x-axis and a y-axis. What you can do is you can take this two-dimensional figure, one axis here, 2 dimensions, and you can start pulling it through a third dimension, pulling it through height. Start adding height to it. So you have this base here, and you start adding height to it. And so you had 2 dimensions to start, and you start pulling up, and you start adding height. And you can do this with rectangles. You can start with a pentagon and pull up from a pentagon. You can start with an octagon and pull up from an octagon. You can start with a circle here. You can pull up from a circle. Anytime you have a two-dimensional shape with a base on the bottom, you can pull up, pull some height, and create a three-dimensional shape. And that's really good for thinking about volume of cylinders, volume of prisms. So when you start thinking about those different formulas, when we start showing you formulas about volume for cylinders, volume for prisms, think about how you have a 2D shape and you're just adding a third dimension to it. Another way is that you can create a three-dimensional object is you can start spinning a shape around an axis. And so what you can do is if you have a shape, this is going to show you a triangle, and you spin a triangle around an axis, all of a sudden you have a cone. Or if you think about a ring or a circle spinning around an axis, all of a sudden you are going to end up with a sphere. And so you can take two-dimensional objects, you spin them around an axis, and it becomes a three-dimensional object. That's going to be helpful for thinking about volumes for cones and volumes for spheres. Next up, we want to think a little bit about how to name 3D objects. We're going to give you formulas, so we'll say this formula goes with this object. You're going to want to be able to line those up. So with the names, you start with the base, because again, all these objects, you have the base, and then you're pulling up, you're adding some height to it to make it 3 dimensions. So you start with the name of the base. So the base here is a hexagon, and it's a prism because the top is the same as the bottom. Those are both congruent, so that makes it a prism. If they're not congruent, if they're coming to a point, it would be called a pyramid. So again, we start with the base, which is a hexagon here, and because they all come to a point, it's a pyramid. So first word's base. Second word talks about whether the bottom is congruent with the top, or whether it's all coming to a point. So we have a pentagonal prism, pentagon on the top, pentagon on the bottom, and it's a prism because it all lines up, all congruent. Last up, just to introduce you to a little more vocabulary, make sure we're all on the same page with these. A face is a word that's going to pop up a lot. So the face for these three-dimensional objects, three-dimensional figures, is going to be the side of a 3D 3D object. And so this pink right here is one face of this pyramid. The yellow is another face, green is another face. An edge is a line segment where two faces meet. So this line segment right here is an edge. This line segment's an edge. It's wherever two faces meet. And last up, vertex is going to be the corner where the corner where line segments meet, the corner where edges meet. So you got a vertex here, vertex here, vertex here, vertex here. All right. So that was a quick overview of 3 ways to make 3D objects, how to name them, some vocab about edges, faces, and vertices, vertex. And then last up, secret hot question. So for this secret hot question, how many vertices does this figure have? Vertices is just a plural form of vertex. So we're asking how many corners is that 3-dimensional figure going to have? And then lastly, here are your 8 IXL skills. These skills, especially these ones in the H category, are going to go very quickly. Make sure you take care of those by next Friday.